Hi, my name is Noah Suderman, and my dad is a Patreon supporter of Third Floor Wars. I listen to Tabletop Talk because of the hard work and effort that Craig Shipman puts into every podcast so that his viewers can become better Malifaux players.
Yeah, if you can learn to do your schemes early on, you're also then aware of what your opponent's going to be trying to do as well, eventually. And then once they're solid in their sort of almost muscle memory of this is how I get my schemes, right, they're done and boxed off early. Like what Tom said, you know, you're not having to play catch up, and then you've got that sort of window to try and deny your opponent instead.
Howdy folks, Craig here. Yet another path to Podium. This time it's the 40-player 3-round event called Breach in the North that happened in the UK. You Arcanist, Dreamer, and Pandora players should get a lot from these recaps. Those of you that play against Neverborn, you also should learn a lot as well. We go through the different stages and phases of getting better at Malifaux. We talk about what they brought, who they beat, and how they did it. We discuss all the different ways to approach turf war as a strategy. There's some really good advice on getting ready for an event, and probably my favorite bit is at the end where we talk about how to be a good opponent and how to handle difficult personalities when they're across the table. Enjoy.
Playing a tabletop strategy game allows you to unplug and test your skills against friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars delivers useful strategies, discussions, battle reports, and reviews to tabletop games like Malifaux. If you want to get better at the games you already play, or discover the games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
Craig here on the Third Floor. Today we have the Podium from the Breach in the North 4 event in the UK. Now it's run by a friend of the show, Carl Lee, who's been on before, and it had over 40 players battling over 3 rounds. And I think one thing that's pretty significant about this event is really it's kind of the season ender over in the UK. So they've got Masters coming up in January, and I believe this was the last event that would impact the rankings on who would qualify for the UK Masters and who wouldn't. So a lot at stake, and it kind of helps us understand that why so many people showed up for a three-round event. Part of that is because Carl is really good at what he does, and two, we're seeing a nice surge in popularity on M3E as well. So we've got 3 guests, everybody that made it to the podium. We've got the winner of the event. Now, Emma Newman, she's new to the show. But not new to Malifaux or the scene in Malifaux. And she did, like I said, take first place. And I've been looking forward to having Emma on the show because we have a common friend, Alex Drake, who listeners are obviously very familiar with Alex. So, Emma, welcome to the Third Floor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, I got to know, how did you get started playing miniature games, and how did you end up finding Malifaux?
So I think unlike a lot of people, I didn't play miniatures games when I was younger. It's when I went to university that I joined the gaming society there. So I started playing like Magic the Gathering and 40k, and I used to do 40k tournaments. But I didn't really enjoy the sort of scene very much. I found it quite aggressive sometimes, and just a bit much for me. So me and Alex just sort of stumbled across Malifaux because we really liked the models, and we originally bought them just to sort of paint them. And then we had a test game, and we've sort of been hooked ever since. And that was like 5 years ago, I think.
Oh, wow. I don't think I realized that you've been playing for that long.
Yeah. I'm not saying we were playing well for that long, but...
Oh, that's great. Well, very, very cool. Now, our second guest is James Doxey. Of course, James has been on the show several times, and I'm going to have links to all of the previous episodes in the show notes. So if you've missed any of James's episodes, you can grab them there. So, James, welcome back to the Third Floor.
Thank you for having me.
So yet another podium for you, sir. Congratulations. So what have you been up to since the last time you were on?
Yeah, so I think since the last time I was on, we had the UK Nationals. That didn't go so well for me. I knew going in that there were probably two kind of key master and strategy types I didn't want to go against, or two masters in two strategies I didn't want to play against at the event. And lo and behold, on day 2, I hit both of them. So slightly disappointing nationals, not terrible, but not anywhere near as nice as I would have liked. So coming into this event, my scores are kind of set up for masters for the year. So this event couldn't affect my placing at all in masters. So I came in to experiment with some masters I haven't played too much, and sort of fill that gap in my line ready for masters.
So now it's just going to be prepping up. And now, do you guys with master? Do you get the pools ahead of time, or do you get them that day with masters?
I think it's that day. To be honest, I don't take masters overly seriously. I kind of view that event as getting into that event as the prize rather than the event itself.
Okay.
And I've qualified every year I've competed, and I think the thing I find with masters is it becomes quite random because you're so skill matched. It tends to depend on what you hit when and who you hit when a little bit more than other events. So. I tend to relax into it, but sort of, just trying to fill those gaps in my line, probably more for the looking ahead to the 2020 season.
Right. So if I'm understanding it correctly, you're essentially saying that it's meaningless who wins Masters, right?
I think well, we do have a history of what we do is the prize for Masters is the cheapest, plasticest crown we can find, generally speaking. Great. One year, I think it was actually a paper Burger King crown that the winner was crowned with. So there is a tradition of not taking it too seriously. But also, it tends to be, I think there's a danger in taking those sorts of kind of invitational events too seriously. So I tend to be more relaxed about that one. Plus, no one ever remembers, like, you either qualify for Masters. Qualifying for Masters is something. Winning Masters is something. Coming second, 15th, 16th, no one remembers. Right. So it's one of those where I probably took it more seriously on day 2. If I'm not knocked out on day 1, if I get towards the final, that's probably when I'm more worried about it, but for now, no, looking ahead to 2020.
That's great. So our final guest who got third is Tom Panah, and he, some of you might know Tom from his YouTube channel. He's got a great YouTube channel called T&G Productions, and I'll have a link for it in the show notes. They do a lot of really good content there, cover 40K, Guild Ball, not Malifaux, but Tom did take third. And like I said, he's not new to tabletop gaming. So Tom, welcome to the third floor.
Thank you very much for having me, Craig.
So, Tom, you've been playing tabletop games for a while, obviously, and you feature them on your channel. How did Malifaux come into your rotation?
Very sideways is the honest answer. We've kind of, I think similar to Emma, I came into wargaming or tabletop gaming very late. I think I'm within my 3rd year still, and most of that has been obnoxiously on camera. So it's kind of quite an unnatural way of playing games. And in many respects, the skirmish level games that we've played, like Guild Ball, Walking Dead, Shadespire, they've all been because they've got an interesting mechanic and something that we can play on camera in a relaxed manner. Now, Malifaux was something I had a big interest in based on the lore. I remember literally as soon as I got into wargaming, looking at the miniatures and thinking, these are stunning. What is this game? And looking at the lore and falling in love with it. And it was a dismissive flippance probably in my own account of, it's got cards involved. There's no way I can manage that on camera, showing people what I've got in my hand and things like that. And it was only really after playing Shadespire for a few battle reports that actually I kind of went, this is doable. And it was just then finding a scene. And in September, I think I started playing Malifaux just at the end of September, start of October. A gaming store about 40 minutes away put a group, and you'll know this, you're part of many groups of local gaming stores just to chip in for information and chip into getting games and people to find. And they just went, we're going to run a growth league, and it just exploded. And I rolled the dice, turned up for the day, and have just fallen deeply, deeply in love with it. And there's a fantastic community there with a real varied meta, for want of a better word, that has been so welcoming and so supportive. And that's what kind of led to me going to this event.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Tom, because I've noticed that about Malifaux, and I still haven't quite figured out why it is, but just all over the world, the different Malifaux players that I talk to, they at some point they will bring up, the community is part of the reason I got into the game. It just, for whatever reason, this game seems to attract just a good group of people that take the game seriously, but aren't for lack of a better word, asshats to play with. It's just a welcoming group, and I'm not sure why that is.
I think it's a game that's got a lot of moving parts, and I think with those moving parts and with those varied goals that you can have with each battle, it means there's a lot of discourse between the players, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later. The master that I've ended up plumping with for my first one also involves a lot of dialogue between the players, and I think any game that does that and kind of limits the standoffish, I'm going to do X, and then that's followed by Y, and it's more, I'm going to do X, but I think it might do this. It builds that kind of rapport between the players, and I think it naturally leads to you having a more enjoyable game.
You know what? I'd not thought about that. And the other thing that popped in my head as you were talking to Tom is I think of compared to a lot of other miniature games out there, there's so much player agency in this game. There's, obviously there's random numbers. The cards are random, but it's minimized so much that I also wonder if, because the player who made the better decisions generally wins the game. I wonder if that helps with the kind of saltiness that you can get with other games where, the dice go against you and stuff like that. I don't know. It's interesting.
Everyone's got the opportunities to do something cool every battle, and traditionally you will score some level of points, and I think that's massively in Malifaux's favor.
Yep, that's a good call. Good call. All right, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down round by round. It was 3 rounds. I want to go through each round, and I really want to kind of understand how each of these guys approached the pool, what crews they brought, who they played against, what did the opponent bring. And let's kind of figure out how over the course of 3 rounds they made that path to podium, and see if we can't learn a little bit on how to get better so that we can have better successes. So we'll take a quick break and we'll talk about round 1. All right, so first round, it was an interesting pool. So it's plant explosives, it's standard deployment, and the schemes were breakthrough, dig their graves, search the ruins, assassinate, and take prisoner. Now, James, you played Andrew Walker, and it was a close game. You only won by a point. It was 6-5. When you looked at this pool, James, how much was the pool an influence on who you brought?
Probably the pool was less of an influence on the fact that I was wanting to play some new masters that I don't play a lot of, and I've had a lot of practice with. So I aim to play Colette in this objective set, and she's perfectly suited for it.
Yep.
So broadly, went for search. And went for search and breakthrough, and just aim to run across the board with Colette and take and put some markers down, which is the thing she does.
At that point, James, how many games of Colette did you have under your belt?
This was probably, I'm going to say it was game 3. There were probably some at the end of beta or just after beta. I think I deliberately didn't play her during the beta period because she always gets a disproportionate amount of testing anyway.
Yeah.
So I probably played 1, maybe 2 before at the end of beta, but recently, this is probably about game 3.
Nice. And what did Andrew bring?
So Andrew's a local player, someone I play semi-regularly out of our local game store, and he's just switched over to Bayou, so he was playing Martucket.
Very nice. So can you kind of give us an idea, some key moments in the game or things that allowed you to eke out a 1-point win?
Yeah, I think, our games are always close. So he's a very talented player moving over from Guild Ball. We're getting a bit of an influx in the UK at the moment of sort of experienced Guild Ball players who seem to, they all seem to be talented when they get across to Malifaux. It obviously translates well.
It does, yeah.
It's interesting because we lost a lot of players to Guild Ball when Guild Ball first came out. So it's interesting to see players coming back the other way now. So yeah, I think key moments were probably, I think it was probably on turn, he dropped a lot of bombs on turn 1, which is something I think we've talked about on the podcast before. I know a lot of players aim to just get across the board, drop all their bombs on turn 1, and kind of move on from there. And I think that's a little bit of a mistake because, to my view, bombs are safer when you're carrying them rather than when they're on the board.
Right.
So I think on the first turn, he dropped 3 bombs, and by the end of turn 1, I think only one of those bombs was still on the board, and I think that was on his half now. So I had quite an aggressive kind of counter run into that turn. And I think that just checked his momentum enough to get over the top. But Mars are particularly frightening concept when with the amount of focus shooting you've got, because a lot of Showgirl's defense is predicated on negative to attack flips, which doesn't really help you when they're focus shooting into you. So a close game for once. I was outnumbered by the number of Soulstone miners on the board. So I brought one, he brought two. No, it was a good game, and I think it just came down to that initial miscalculation of sort of dropping his markers a little bit early, and then that letting me check the momentum and then kind of get a point ahead on the strat.
Yeah, I think, like you said, James, we've talked about, seeding bombs early and whether that can be a good thing or a bad thing. And I don't think there's a definitive answer there. I think it's one of those things that kind of depends on board state and the opposing crew. Doing it against Colette is dangerous because, that's a very mobile crew. And so if you're dropping bombs everywhere, it doesn't take too much effort for Colette's crew to get there and collect those.
Yeah, I think there's a thing in Malifaux, and it probably come from Magic the Gathering players probably get this, but in a control, when two control decks play each other, you've got to figure out which one of you is the aggressor, because if you don't figure that out correctly, one of you will lose. So one of you is more aggressive than the other. I think the same is true in Malifaux, both with aggression and with mobility. And I think for a highly mobile crew, sometimes it's difficult to recognize when the other crew is more mobile and interactive than you are. And I think that's probably what it is. I think the more mobile crew can afford to seed bombs early and use space to control or prevent the enemy from getting at the bombs. But that's very difficult to do for Colette.
Yeah, and you kind of hinted at it, James, or if you have a more board state control master, you can more safely drop those bombs because you can protect them because you're basically creating such huge threat zones. But it's interesting. I had not thought about it. We always talk about, who's the beatdown, who's the control. That's the analogy from Magic the Gathering. But I think you're right. I think that especially, if you're a mob player, it's very rarely that you're not the mobile crew. Usually you're the mobile crew and the other one isn't. But against Colette, you have to definitely reassess that situation.
Absolutely.
So Emma, you played Daniel Each, and you had a solid win with scoring all 8 points. Daniel scored 5. Who did you bring to the matchup?
I brought Dreamer, sort of obviously, because he's what I'm playing a lot of at the moment. And Daniel was playing Molly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was interesting. I've not really played against Molly very much, actually. So it was a good game to sort of play against her in sort of schemes and strats that she's quite good at, because she's quite maneuverable with like the Kruligans and Archie. So
yeah, definitely. Now, what schemes did you end up picking, Emma?
I took Breakthrough and Search the Ruins. So I know it was quite a scheme sort of heavy choice with that and trying to drop plant explosives, but I thought, because she's quite maneuverable, Take Prisoner's not really viable, and I'm terrible at dig your graves anyway, so just sort of avoided those. Scheme. Yeah.
So I guess for starters, Emma, as somebody had not played against Molly a lot, is there any kind of advice or learnings that you got from the game? So if someone out there is going to be playing Molly soon, things they should keep in mind or watch out for?
Like how maneuverable like the Kruligans are and Archie, like because they can teleport on their quick action to another friendly. I think it's minion or enforcer or something like that across the board.
Yeah, it's that by your side ability.
Yeah. So I knew they could do that, but I just didn't sort of comprehend how far that could get them or how fast. So I think by the end of turn 1, he had 2 Kruligans and Archie over the center line, just, ready to be a pain.
Yep.
So definitely watch out for that. And if you can, kill the Kruligans.
It's that's good advice. It is really the by your side ability is one of those things that you read it and you go, okay, that makes sense to me. And then you see it on the board, you go, holy crap. Like I knew you could do that, but to actually see you do it is a lot different. Now, Emma, you play, I know, mostly Dreamer. Have you been just soloing Dreamer completely, or is there some other Neverborn Masters you've been goofing around with?
I've been messing around with Nekima a bit, and I've got Pandora as well. But I think I find Nekima a bit too aggressive for my play style. I'm not very good at just running up and attacking people. I'm good at pretending to do that, but when it actually comes to doing it, I'm not very good, I don't think. I sort of bottle it, and I only end up with like 1 or 2 attacks instead of like the full force of sort of a Nephilim crew at people. So yeah, I'm enjoying sort of the flexibility that Dreamer has to offer. Well, and you benefit from the fact that at this point, Emma, I can't even imagine how many games of Dreamer you have under your belt that affords you a lot of freedom to focus on the game because you've got the mechanics down at this point. Oh, yeah, definitely. I found that with whatever master I play, the more I play it, I sort of know what they're doing at the back of my brain, and I can actually concentrate on how to win the game. It's like there's several stages of Malifaux. It's learning what your crew does, learning what your opponent's crew does, and then learning how to actually do the game and not just get your models in the right position. No, I completely agree. Now, out of curiosity, Emma, because you play locally, you play in events. It's not a secret that you're probably going to be playing Dreamer. Are you finding your opponents kind of teching against Dreamer because of that? Do you feel like there's a potential drawback to the fact that they know what keyword you're going to bring? I think to some extent, yes, but not so much that it feels a bit mean or a bit unfun. Right. Like, I think I think it's the same decisions that you'd make when I declared Dreamer at the start of a game. They've just sort of already made those decisions prior to me actually declaring it. So I don't think they build a crew specifically to take down, my set 7 or 8 models. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the same sort of things that they do as soon as they get the chance to, once we've declared faction and leader. Right. So yeah, it's not too bad. So based off of that, is there a particular matchup that you really dislike? Is there another keyword out there that you're like, oh God, not this one? Is there a hard counter out there for Dreamer? I don't know, actually. Now you've asked me that, I hadn't even thought about it. Excuse me. I think... I don't know, and that's the honest answer. Well, and there may not be, but I mean, based off of the game, can you think of a match recently where just the basic mechanics of that keyword really made it tough for you? I found playing against a Dreamer crew in a mirror matchup really hard, actually. and it was so frustrating because I knew what he was going to do, right. And he did it anyway, and I was still surprised that it worked. That was probably the most difficult one I played actually recently against another Dreamer player. So Emma, for the people out there trying to say that Dreamer's overpowered, it needs some attention, you're not helping to counter that argument. No, I'm not. To be honest, though, I have said, and I also said this through beta, there's certain mechanics on Dreamer's crew that need altering, and I think that still stands, definitely. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't really help with that. That's okay. I mean, it's a matter of being honest. Now, one of the main mechanics in the Mali crew is, that Leth's Caress. I'd be curious to know how much of that impacted your decision making during the game. Now you've said the name of that ability, I don't know what it is. That's the if you declare the same action a second time. Yeah. So thank you for that. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So the first couple of turns, it didn't matter too much because Molly was hidden behind a building. Uh-huh. So actually, she didn't have line of sight to the vast majority of my crew. And I take a lot of daydreams because they give free pushes. Mm-hmm. So I find that I don't have to worry too much about double walking people because I can push people up with a daydream and then they can charge, or they'll do a walk and a charge anyway. And when I'm using like Dreamer's summon abilities only once per turn anyway, and the sort of attack actions that my crew have, I sometimes want to be focusing to do them anyway, or doing other actions with them. So like Teddy's Terrorize ability is so good. So sometimes I'm not actually doing, 2 attacks with Teddy. I might be terrorizing somebody away and then charging in with him anyway. Right. So I didn't find it too difficult. But also, I think by the time Molly was a bit more up the board, there wasn't a lot else on the board of my opponent, so I was sort of just not having to worry about it too much.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what's funny about that ability is I'll talk to Molly players sometimes and they'll say, less caress doesn't really matter that much. And what they don't realize is how often the effect of less caress is invisible, because you don't see what the opponent didn't do and the choices they didn't make because of less caress. So, but when you wipe the whole crew off the board by the time Molly comes out, Emma, I think it probably makes life a little bit easier. But that was a real nice win. So, Tom, you had also a solid win. You scored all 8 points, and you played Vlad, and I'm going to get Vlad. I apologize. I'm going to get your last name wrong. Jelly is going to be my attempt, and I apologize. But 8-4 win. So, Tom, what crew did you bring?
So I'm exclusively playing Pandora at the moment, simply out of necessity, in the sense that she's the Neverborn Master that you can pretty much get everything for the keyword for that's available. I do have longing eyes towards Nekima, but for now, Pandora is definitely doing the job. So coming into it was against Dashel of the Guild, and coming into this whole event, I'm under 10 games coming in, so every master's a new master to face against, and summoning masters, I got very lucky that I'd played a friend who had a Kirai crew on the Wednesday before the event. So I'd had at least an opportunity to see what summoning did to an extent. And what it did was absolutely terrify me. But coming into to Dashel with the schemes, I should say that I took the Search the Ruins, because I just feel that's just one that I think everybody takes. Especially there was a really good array of terrain in both of our halves. So we both ended up taking that one. And I went for the Assassinate because if you're going with Neverborn, you probably want to try and take out their master. Mm-hmm. And going in with your standard Pandora-ish crew with Pandy Candy, Cade, Teddy, Poltergeist, Two Sorrows, and then essentially I'd been tossing up between Carver and Hinematsu, and I'd had a whole day talking to a fellow new player about the pros and cons of Carver, and he's all I had used. And then I made the decision to use Hinematsu for the entire event, and as soon as the opponent declared Guild, Carver came straight back out. With the focus ability. And it was a really, really interesting game. I think one thing I had learned is that if you play a master you don't really know, and they're a summoning master, you're going to get pass tokens very quickly. And I think for the first turn, I actively abused the ability to pass the turn. So I'd activate something and then pass 2, then activate again. And he had this really interesting lineup of a core anchor with Dashel, and it's a Queeg and the Dispatcher, and there's a guy who explodes when you kill him. There's all manner of like troops. And then he had this amazing flanking lineup of having 2 mounted guards of 3 guild hounds that had all the explosives on them.
Oh, nice.
So he had all these activations at the start where he's giving everybody focused, summoning things. And I was just passing just to try and get to some level of parity for the last activations of the turn. I think that's very much a Guild Ball mentality of trying to keep the activations equal. Yep. And he was right across the center line with his flankers, and it was very, very interesting going into that first turn. And essentially I had a decision at the end of the first turn, which was what to do with Pandora. She had been lured up to get herself a little bit further forward, and it ended up being the Hail Mary of the triple walk, open the box, to get within 6 inches of that anchor that he had at the backfield of his board. And I think that ended up swaying the game. If it doesn't work, Pandora dies terribly. But if it does work and you can open the box, you can stun things. It wasn't so much as that, it's to get the mood swings in place, which is her ability to dictate the activation order of the opponents. With a summoning opponent, they're going to give you pass tokens. You can discard those instead of cards. So Pandora's was within 6 inches of that entire anchor. And then essentially every time something in that anchor needed to activate, I would discard and make one of the flankers go. So their activations were out of the way for later turns, meaning that your heavy hitters could then kill them. And Pandora's survivable enough to kind of hold on for 2 turns with the Terrifying, she was in cover at the time, with her Shockwave, with her opening the box and the Misery. It was real kind of could have gone the other way if that wouldn't have worked as well as it did.
So, Tom, when I found out how well you did at this event, and I got Carl to kind of introduce us, what you did at this event is not common. It's very rare that you'll see somebody do as well as you did this early in your Malifaux career. So I'd be curious about kind of the muscle memory that you have from other games. Obviously, the fact that you this Malifaux is not your first tabletop game, helped. But is there something that you think has helped you, either something from other games or another game in particular that maybe made the learning curve a little less steep in Malifaux?
Yeah, I think there's two major things that I could attribute that to. I'm usually very, very nervous going into organized play. And I think it comes from by no means are we a big channel on YouTube, but I think you might know this as well, Craig, that when you're associated with a product, online, there's a little bit of scalping when you go to an event of, if you can take out the YouTuber, it's always a good thing. So I'm always a little bit nervy going into an event. And I've got to credit that maybe some of those games I've played previously, like Guild Ball, like Batman, that are highly positional based games. Pandora, I didn't really know what she did when I picked her up, but actually she turns out to be such a control master that I think positioning's key. The other thing I've got to credit is, like I said, my local meta is a little bit bizarre. There's 2 henchmen, there's a Guild Ball national champion, there's a Batman consistent podium player. There are very, very friendly, but also very, very high level players. And I think we've been lucky that we've all taken different masters. So every game that I've had, the muscle memory has been not so much me finding out what the other masters do, it's kind of playing within my own game. And I think going into this event, not knowing what the other masters did, I knew roughly, as Emma said, I think the first stage of playing Malifaux is learning what your crew does. I was getting to the stage where I knew roughly, right, if I'm in this kind of area of the field, I'm going to put myself in an advantageous position. And I think the muscle memory of other games and positioning comes in. I think Pandora is all about the bubbles and, the kind of ranges. And I think being able to eyeball that at the start of the battle really helps quite a lot. And I think there was no small amount of luck. I'm not going to claim that it was a huge sway of a battle. I think if a couple of flips would have gone the other way, you would have seen Pandora die quite early in turn 2 or turn 3, and then things would have been terrible. But it was a really good battle. I think he was fantastic in explaining to me. I said at the start, I'm kind of unknown what his crew did, and he was fantastic in kind of saying, right, this will do this. I think he summoned an executioner, the one with the big claws. And I just went, oh, that thing's going to stab me badly, isn't it? And he kind of was like, yeah, that thing's going to really hurt. But it was that, again, I think I said at the start, Pandora's fantastic for interacting with your player. You're doing so much during their activations, thanks to the misery aura. And they're doing so much in discussing with you when they want to put conditions, especially a guild player who wants to focus. That kind of helped ease the stress that I had going in. And I think then you just find your rhythm. And I think turn 2 was both for scoring our plant explosives, but turn 3 was then when I had my search the ruins and assassinate. And I think when you get up on the schemes, your opponent's playing catch up then. And I think you've essentially just got to try and minimize risk going forward in those subsequent turns.
Now, Tom, was there something truly unique to Malifaux that you think, the fact that you played other games may not have helped? So is there an aspect of Malifaux for somebody out there who's either, comes from a lot of other games that you found particularly challenging or so unique that you really had to kind of start from scratch and learning?
The one thing I really struggled with was actually the schemes. So the strategy, I found myself in my first 5 or 6 games, it was only the last couple before going to the event of me starting to play the schemes more than just the strat. And I still have games now, I've played one since, where I lean too heavily on the main strats, especially something like Idols, where it's like, right, that's the thing I need to focus on. And I think what is something that a new player needs to kind of get their head around is those schemes, like I said, if you can get up on them, sometimes it's okay to not score the strat each turn if you've got your schemes in place to get you the points in future ones.
Yeah. So Emma, you kind of laid out kind of the 3 phases of Malifaux, which I think were completely accurate. Where do you think what Tom is talking about falls into that? Like, when do you think you really, we know it's kind of stage 3, right? When you actually start playing the game. But for you, either when you're bringing in a new crew, like you're doing with Nekama, or if going back in time 5 or 6 years, like when do you think a player should really start, kind of flexing and paying attention to the schemes themselves?
I think actually they're just as important as the strategy, especially coming from M2E where they were worth more points than the strategy. So I think it's ingrained in me, because you used to be able to score, 3, 3, and 4, didn't you? 3 for each scheme, right, and then 4 for the strategy because it was a 10-point game. So for me, it's always been, the focus has actually been more on the schemes. because also I feel like they're things there where you don't necessarily have to involve your opponent as much.
Yep.
So the strategy is sometimes contested, or it's something that you're both trying to do. But while you're trying to develop yourself, if you focus on the schemes, it's sort of like playing the game with yourself. It's something that you can do and have control over, which scores you points with limited sort of, hopefully anyway, denial from your opponent. Because I think denialing of schemes is something that comes way later in sort of competitive or well-rounded play. So I find when you're in that mid stage, you tend to all score a lot of points because you're all doing your schemes and the strat. And then after you've learned how to do that, you then learn to go back in and deny your opponent while you're at it. So getting the sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here.
That's okay. No, this is good.
So I think if you can get your, if you can learn to do your schemes early on, you're also then aware of what your opponent's going to be trying to do as well, eventually. And then once they're solid in their sort of almost muscle memory of this is how I get my schemes, right, they're done and boxed off early. Like what Tom said, you're not having to play catch up, and then you've got that sort of window to try and deny your opponent instead.
Yeah, definitely. James, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think I jump off from both the points there. I think where you then start to get to really is the sort of a view of, okay, well, having sort of got a sense of, okay, now I'm going to do my schemes, now I'm going to do my strategy. It then becomes about you get better at evaluating where is the diff coming from in this objective set. Where is the where do I feel that the diff at the end of the game is going to come from, and that for me then becomes the next stage. Okay, I know how to do all these things. I know how to deny these against my opponent, and then choosing your battles and learning to choose your battles. Which points you're going to fight for and which points you're not going to fight for becomes the kind of the crucial thing.
Yeah, that is definitely some second level play, James, because you're 100% right. And I like to build off of what Emma said, those different phases and, learning to score and not to score. But the one thing I'd be curious to know, James, because like Emma, you played a lot in M2E as well, that transition in the scoring system. So, and for those of you that didn't play in second edition, as Emma mentioned, was 10 points. You had two schemes that you had picked that you could score up to 3 points on each, and then you could score 4 points on the strat, and then they shaved off down to 8 points for 3. How big of a change do you think that was, James?
It's interesting. I certainly think it changes the balance of the game. Now, I played from first edition, and first edition worked the same way as it does now broadly. It was 8 points broken down the same way. So how much difference does it make? I think what it does, it puts the emphasis back on the strategy to a certain extent. I think probably the bigger change for me is the difference between scoring. In M2E, you could score all of the points during the game, whereas it's having every scheme have an end of game scoring element now. I think that probably puts more focus, and that's probably a bigger change than the point breakdown for me.
I agree.
Because it locks a lot of your points to the end of the game. But yeah, other people will have other views.
No, I agree with you, James. Unlike in 2E, there is a particular time that at least 2 points are going to get scored or not scored, and that having that time pinned, it changes things, and it changes, I think, everything from crew building down to how you play the game. All right, guys, let's take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about round 2. We'll be right back.
Hi guys and girls, ladies and gents, I'm Kevin Smith. I'm the Southwest boy living in the southeast of the UK. I contribute $18 or £13 a month to Third Floor Wars. And why? Well, I work 50 hours a week as a supermarket manager, have 3 children, so in my spare time, I just want to play foe. And if I can't do that, the next best thing is listening to the Third Floor Wars podcast. Not only do I hear about what I play and the gaps in my knowledge, but I also hear about all of the crews and tactics that I need to beat, and often how they've even performed in recent tournament reports. The online store has some great merchandise, including t-shirts and mugs to buy now to show your support. You should be a Patreon too. So pause this episode and go to patreon.com and search for Third Floor Wars, or grab the link in the show note.
So how much are 3 or 4 of these episodes worth to you a month? Third Floor Wars has a Patreon, and if you think they're worth $1, $5, $20 a month, swing by and become a patron. We have polls to decide the next episode of the pod, along with early releases of articles and podcasts. Everything we release goes out to everyone, but sometimes our patrons get a head start. The link is in the show notes, or just search for Third Floor Wars on patreon.com. Thanks for the support. Special shout out to some of our newest patrons: Brian Bauer, Emil, James Doxey, Luke Athico, Shay Wallace, Michael Roper, Andre, and LaShawn Allen. Thanks to you and everybody else that helps support us. So we go into round 2. Each of you guys obviously have a win under your belt now. James's diff is not quite as high as Emma and Tom's. The deployment is Wedge. We've got Turf War. The schemes were Power Ritual, Outflank, Claim Jump, Hold Up Their Forces, and Vendetta. So Emma, we know that you brought Dreamer, and you got another impressive win, this time against Allie Whitfield. What did Allie bring?
Allie was playing Colette. Yeah, she had Colette and a Corfrey duet and some other performery type models.
Yeah. And did you find Colette to be a challenge?
I think no.
Okay.
But I think that's because I deliberately didn't take anything that involved scheme markers.
Right.
I took Outflank and Hold Up Their Forces. So, because I know Colette can sort of very easily, as James was saying, deny scheme markers by picking them up, or bury you and pop you out near a scheme marker that you put on the board. So I deliberately didn't take anything that would sort of allow her to get up and running with that.
Sometimes countering a crew is just a matter of picking the right schemes.
Yeah, so I found that I think also Ali had an unfortunate pick with one of her schemes that I didn't notice or realize I'd done it. And I accidentally denied her 2 points by killing a model. So she had Claim Jump on a Corfrey duet, and I killed the Corfrey duet turn 2. So I didn't realize sort of how far ahead I was by the end of turn 2.
Right, because that had not been declared. And that was that was a roll of the dice pick on Allie's part, because you're going to want that duet in the middle of things. The duet's going to be a threat, which makes the duet a target priority, and to use that for the claim jump is taking some chances. That's for sure. Yeah,
very much. And I think I've got 3 models in my crew that ignore armor.
Yeah,
and go and shoot against willpower. So it's defense 7, but I didn't really mind that because I could target the willpower, ignoring the armor. So I didn't really struggle with the Corfrey duet at all, actually.
We're going to hear all kinds of chatter at the end of when this episode comes out, Emma, about how good Dreamer is.
I'm also a good player. It's not just Dreamer.
I agree. Well, so out of curiosity, though, what do you think? What do you think is the most challenging thing about being a Dreamer player? So, what makes playing Dreamer hard? So somebody who's thinking of taking Dreamer on, where's a place where they're going to have to struggle and definitely get their games in?
I think because he can do so much stuff. It's the same issues I had when I used to play Sandeep. He's really quite flexible, but I think as a byproduct of that, you can mess it up quite easily. Like if you spend a turn where you put Dreamer slightly out of position, not within 2 inches of a friendly Nightmare model, he'll die because you've put him, you've been a bit of a turnip and ran him up the board and he's not protected anymore. So you've got to just be really mindful of all the little components that work together. If one of them sort of clicks out of place, it can go downhill quite quickly. Like if you do a wrong summon in the wrong place, because when somebody fails a willpower, you don't have to bring a model out that's buried. Mm-hmm. You can choose to. But sometimes when I start, I was like, oh, quick, a willpower's been failed. Pop them on, like get the stitched on the board. And it'd be like on the flank, nowhere near anybody that I needed it to be. So it's trying to be mindful of when you want these things to actually happen. And sometimes reining yourself in from getting excited and being like, actually, no, I want this model over there. I'm going to wait and pop it out somewhere else instead. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, not just getting carried away with how much stuff you can do, because you'll go through the whole game, but like, yeah, I've summoned this, I've done this, I've done this. Oh, and I've not scored any of my schemes because I've been too carried away. Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the hardest thing about being a Dreamer player is finding the box, given it hasn't out yet. But that could just be me.
That's true, and it's actually, I think Tom said it without, realizing it, the implications of it, but it's got to be a challenge, Tom, being a new player.
It's really hard at the moment.
Yeah, stuff is just not available. And even for people that had all of their models in 2E, there's a lot of keywords out there that have unreleased models that are new to 3rd edition, and you almost can't play the keyword. A lot of them are in Guild. You almost can't play the keyword without either having those models or proxying them. So I'm anxious for more product to hit the shelves.
It's easy to get 30 soul stones at the moment. I think getting up to the 50 is where the real challenge is. Their release schedule is logical from one sense, but from another sense, it's that, well, I need this box of things or I need several. And like I said, there's a solitary tear running down my cheek as I think of Nekima, but she's definitely one of those that needs her totem. And Hayridden, I believe, has changed factions, hasn't he? So it's just a waiting game, isn't it?
Yeah. But we can be spoiled and we can bitch about it now. So, so Tom, you had a good game against a buddy of mine, Dan Brown. He's a fellow Rezer player, and you won 5-3. You brought Pandora, obviously, but what did Dan bring?
This was a fantastic game. I've got to credit Dan massively for this. This was me realizing how elite this kind of top level kind of play was, because not only did he give me his app code, which said round 2 on it, so he'd obviously bespoke listed it. He had a very interesting elite crew. He had Von Stuck from the Rezers. He had the research assistant, the valedictorian, an undergrad, Archie, and the Dead Rider with 10 soul stones to spare. So he was really looking for stoning damage, getting the suits he wanted with the Dead Rider rather than just waiting for the tokens, using what he needed with it. And, he very kindly, again, as did all my opponents, taught me through Von Stuck. And the only thing that registered in my head was he ignores stunned. And then Archie ignores stunned. So as a Pandora player, you just kind of roll your eyes and go, okay, then what are we going to do? So he, like I said, he went with this very elite, heavy hitting crew. And it's at this point that I kind of made the decision to switch Carver for Hinamatsu. As I was going for outflank and claim jump very similarly. And I think Hinamatsu's fantastic for outflank because her ability to charge and get the extra 2 inches means she can bounce up to the wing, score it, and then get back into combat for the next turn and then bounce back for turn 5.
Yep.
It's real maneuverability. And it came down to a very early activation where in turn 1, Archie barreled down the middle of the field looking to threaten, try and get power ritual. I think he had taken, kind of get into the backfield. And it was a couple of good damage flips from Teddy that basically took him off the board. And then as soon as you get up on heavy hitters, I think things start to sway a little bit. And that's, the valedictorian is a terrifying model to deal with. And I think it's such a heavy hitter. But again, I had a few decent damage flips with Pandora on her self-loathing, so she used the attack profile against her. And I think I got a severe damage flip on my first one. And that swayed things. I think I knocked the valedictorian down to 1 HP. And I think Von Stucken managed to bring out a Necropunk or something during this, but I think there was a couple running around that weren't particularly happy. And the Dead Rider got stodged up as well. And I think it was a case of, we both had quite elite crews, but it was Baby Cade is usually useless for me, but he managed to hold up the Dead Rider and annoy it because he's got the stat 7 lore. Yep. So it was the misery ability to push someone 2 inches. So I kept pushing the Dead Rider away from the outflank, away from the 3 inches of the wing. And it was that kind of element of denial that was coming into the battle. The actual power ritual side of his, I was struggling to stop because with the leaps, they're just so quick. But the turf war, you can mess with people using that 2-inch push quite a lot.
Taking outflank against a Pandora crew is tough because you have a ton of ways to move your opponent's models.
Definitely. And I think the claim jump is a really nice one with Pandora to take as well. As I'll probably say in round 3 as well, I took it on Teddy. And Teddy with Cade has the ability to consistently heal, do a fair bit of damage with his 2-inch melee, and again get back towards the center line. So it tends to be a guaranteed point at least having it on Teddy. At least going forward.
Yeah, out of curiosity, Tom, because claim jump is a little tough, right? Because if you declare the first point too early, you're giving you're giving your opponent a ton of time to try to deny the second point. Do you remember in which round you ended up declaring the first point for claim jump on Teddy?
Yep, I'm just having a look here. I think it was turn 4. I declared it very late. It's traditionally 3 or 4 that it pops out. The only time that didn't happen was in round 3, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because that's kind of rush and get the point on the board. But
got it.
It comes out late because I think Teddy's one that people are very much. I think Emma hinted towards it. Your master might have abilities sometimes that you don't think are doing well, or your characters do, but actually the opponent's thinking a lot about it. I came out of this event thinking Pandora didn't do much, but I didn't think about all the annoyances she might have been causing. And I think Teddy's one of those that people are very aware of. What is his 8-inch threat range, I believe it is, of, oh my God, this thing's going to come in, it's going to flurry, it's going to hurt me. So when you hold it around the center zone and it's threatening a good chunk of the board, you can just sometimes then go, oh, I'm just going to hold off and score the claim jump.
Something about, I think Teddy is one of the most sort of underrated models. Not underrated, that's wrong. He's such a good model. He was like MVP in all of my games because I took him in every single one of mine. And he does pack an absolute punch and people are terrified of him. You see this giant teddy bear running at your face for whatever, charging up the board. And Tom's right. Like he's one of those models where if you think you're not doing very well, look at what Teddy's done that game. He's probably killed at least a couple of things, and he can eat other models to heal himself. So even if you don't have healing from other members of your crew, you can keep him alive quite reliably, because he also heals on his attack when he kills stuff as well.
He's got his regen as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a bit surprised you took claim jump on him, to be honest.
It's definitely something that's developed for a little while. I think it's because Baby Cade with his Where's Teddy ability moves Teddy towards Cade. They both heal too, and then you can place. So I think if you overextend Teddy, you can pull him back, give him the healing that he needs. And it's interesting because I think it might be different between a Dreamer crew. I'd be interested to know, Emma, does Teddy tend to be in the opponent's backfield at the end of the game? Because I always find with Pandora, he's hunting a wing usually.
Teddy is just somewhere unreliable, I found. He'll pick a model and go off after it. So I couldn't ever sort of guarantee I'd want to keep him in the center of the board. So that's where I was a bit like, oh, you took it on Teddy, but if you can bring him back with Cade, that makes more sense. Because if my Teddy runs off up the board, he's going to kill something, but then getting him back to the center to score that point is probably quite difficult for me, actually, because he's off hunting somebody.
You should never underestimate how annoying sorrows are for the opponents as well. I think they are phenomenal.
Those models so much.
They are so good. Annoying.
Yeah.
You just plonk them within 4 inches. You don't even have to attack something and just go, I'm just going to keep leeching health off you and healing. And I think they tend to be my flankers. And then I'll have left and right of center will be Teddy, and the other one will be either Hinamatsu or Carver. And then you've got Pandora, Candy, Poltergeist, Cade kind of in the middle. So you can tuck in where you need to. It sounds like some sort of really intense football formation. It's not. But there is a lot of movement shenanigans to get Teddy where you need him to be, which I think may be to Pandora's advantage.
James, out of curiosity, in your faction, is there a model that kind of fits a little bit of what Tom and Emma are talking about? So a model that, at first glance, at the end of the match, you might say, well, this model was garbage. You didn't do anything, but in reality had a huge impact on what your opponent did or didn't do.
I could probably point to Amina. Her prevention of charge aura can probably fall into that category. I think probably used correctly, I'd actually point to the magical training upgrade and the counterspell it gives. And some of those sort of elements, but there are plenty of models that sort of, if can look like they're underutilized. That's certainly a thing that can happen. So that's probably. But yeah, I would struggle to point to one in exactly those terms.
Gotcha.
I'd be interested to ask, because the two more experienced players with Turf War, it's a really interesting strat that how much do you actually assault the opponent's half turf markers? Because you can protect yours quite well and the center one's quite key, but how much do you go for those ones that are in your opponent's side? Because I always struggle with the do I need to commit really far forward? Is it dependent on the crews?
So, I mean, from my perspective, I think Turf War is probably the most interesting strategy in the current set, because you can approach it in so many different ways. You can do everything from, you can go for the full-on assault through to a more subtle, schemy plan, trying to kind of skirmish round and sneak markers in late with things like Don't Mind Me. I tend to go for the secure one of my home quarters early, evacuate from that towards my opponent's half, so that the fight is happening on my opponent's half of the board. But some of that's predicated on how fast the opponent is. So I tend to try and push into my opponent's half, but there are so many different ways to approach Turf War. Is one of the, I think it's probably the most interesting of the current set of strategies for that reason.
Yeah, I'd agree with James on that. It's really interesting because there's so many different ways you can tackle it. I tend to flip both of mine and then go straight into my opponent's half, completely ignore the middle one, because if anybody dies anywhere, that flips back. So I feel like that's wasted AP to flip that over early. And I use that late game if I just need to tick another one over. And often if I find if I charge into my opponent's half, although I've left two unprotected, they're probably not getting reliably past me to go and flip those over, and I'm not in that half anyway for them to kill things. So if you can I find if I just push and keep going onto my opponent's half, it tends to just be a bit of a slide and I don't have to worry about the first two, and then I can deny them and take theirs as well.
That's really interesting with the Masters. I think from Pandora's perspective, you almost want to get into the middle of the board. So that one that's in the middle, like you said, you don't necessarily flip it, but if you can sit there and with the 10-inch kind of self-loathing range, you can then push into your opponent's half and kind of attack. So it's definitely an interesting decision. And, when I saw Von Stuck in that super elite crew, I was kind of worried about them killing me in my own half and those markers getting flipped very quickly and like dropping those points.
You can also, I think, from my perspective, you can getting to that center marker, because you can threaten to flip it late, it gives you a lot more control.
Yep.
The risk around that center marker being anyone dies anywhere, it's turned off. So it's a great one to threaten. And I think from this objective set, this is a really tricky objective set. Looking at the scheme pool deployment combination, I think it's probably the toughest round of the day. So, and I think claim jump, which isn't a scheme I normally rate, actually is probably pretty high up the priority list in this pool. Probably meant the center marker is more relevant in this game, than it would be in the average game of Turf War, I think.
You can fake it out, can't you? You can pretend that you're going towards that center marker and then declare your claim jump late on, and they might just think the model's there to flip that marker.
You can do. There's all sorts of. This is a strategy. This is a round where I think actually players had to take a lot of risks.
Yep.
In order to kind of get to get into the game here, and I think that in itself was quite an interesting, quite an interesting element. Is players have got to really take some risks in this game, because Vendetta and Cleanse Up I think are the easiest, but also the easiest to get accidentally locked out of. To Emma's point, in her game versus Ali.
So, James, you had a shutout game. You won 4-0 against Aaron Bowie. Can you walk us through that match?
Yeah, so Aaron is a new player, and a new player with Dreamer. And I'd already decided I was taking Hoffman into this game, so I was quite pleased. I think Hoffman has a really nice match against Dreamer. I don't know. I'd be curious to see if Emma feels the same way. But I'm really a fan of Hoffman in that matchup.
I've not actually played against Hoffman with my Dreamer crew, so have no idea.
Maybe I should shut up now and not give you any tips. I think Dreamer struggles with the anti-armor, despite the fact a lot of his crew have a kind of a range attack that ignores armor. And I think part of the struggle there is that although they ignore armor on a lot of stuff, that attack has not got very high damage output and is very easily healed back by the Hoffman crew. Plus, with Hoffman picking up potentially the anti-armor, the no ignores armor and the diesel engine aura to prevent damage, it can create quite a nice quite nice, quite challenging sort of setup for an opponent as to sort of, okay, what do I want to do in this? How do I want to go about it? Because it is quite a challenging, or can quite easily be quite a challenging, thing to sort of attack. Well, I don't want to go in with the melee attacks, but the range attacks are on negatives. If I do attack, I'll heal back. So it's, and it's quite, I think it can be quite a tough one for Hoffman to face. In the game against Aaron, what became quite apparent quite early is the game was going to revolve around the Guardian. So I'd taken claim jump on my Guardian, and it became reasonably apparent early on that the Guardian was important to his objectives, because he'd taken Vendetta on it.
Oh, wow.
So there was a huge kind of very early on, there was a 4-point swing on whether or not this Guardian lived and stayed above half wounds. And quite practiced in this matchup. Guardian's quite good for claim jump because he's got a one action that just pushes all the enemy away from him with no resist. So it's very good for going, actually, I'm just going to push you away. So all of that was pretty helpful and got us into a good space. I was just able to get into a good space with those trades, keep the Guardian healthy enough and control the markers, and sort of possibly then had to overinvest into the center, which let me get around the outsides to get control of claim jump, and that was all she wrote, really.
So James, how did he not score a point on turn 2? Did you deny that for Turf War?
I denied Turf War on turn 2. I say he was a relatively new player, and I don't want to, relatively new player, really good bloke, but it was a relatively slow game. I think we got only a few activations into turn 3.
Got it.
So you're looking at a score that sort of is reflective of a relatively short game.
Yeah, it's tough. And not everybody can be Tom, which is Podium on your first event. But it's really...
I'm retired now. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, obviously I love Malifaux, but it's challenging when you get started. And Tom, you called it out that learning how the scoring system works. It is far more intricate and subtle than any other system out there, which is part of, I think, why the game is as good as it is. But as a new player, that's a challenge. But yeah, usually when you see a shutout like that, it's usually the game only went a few turns, or someone just scooped and said, I'm done, you win. But it sounds like it was more just the challenge of getting all the mechanics down for Aaron as a new player.
Yeah, absolutely. But good bloke, and an enjoyable game nonetheless.
Good. So you didn't crush his spirit, James?
I think that's something you would have to ask Aaron.
Okay. All right. So guys, let's take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about the final round, and really see how Emma ended up winning. James got second and Tom got third. We'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. With 3rd edition Malifaux released, it's time for you to get a new mat with new deployment zones. We've tried every mat in the business, and nobody has better quality and selection than Mats by Mars. They're waterproof and they roll and unroll easily, and they're even wet erase Marco compatible. They offer over 35 designs and let you add M3EO overlays for making deployment and positioning a breeze. Check them out at matsbymars.com. They are offering a sweet discount for our listeners. After you found the perfect mat, use the promo code 3rd floor to get 10% off your entire order. If you really want to support us, in the notes of your order, request that our logo be put in the corner of your mat. It's the only way to make the best mat in the business even cooler. Again, that's Mat by Mars. Use the promo code 3rd floor to get a 10% discount. Details are in the show notes. All right, so final round. We've got Emma is sitting in second place. Tom is in fourth, and James is in sixth, which I thought was kind of interesting. Each of you guys were, quote unquote, the underdogs coming into this match. You guys were all 2-0, and you all have more than 10 points of diff. And it's a little tough with 40 people and only 3 rounds. Diff is going to decide it because you're going to end up with a lot of people that end up 3-0 just because you don't have enough rounds to kind of whittle everybody down. And there were some really strong matchups here at the top table. So I don't think anybody could say that you guys didn't play some quality opponents. But let's talk about the pool real quick. You've got flank deployment. It's Reckoning with Search the Ruins, Harness the Ley Line, Detonate the Charges, Deliver a Message, and Claim Jump. Now, Tom, you played Roddick Bry, who's I've never had him on the show, but he's come up in conversations, and at some point we need to get him on the show. Can you kind of walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, Radek's a player that I'm sure James and Emma will be very familiar with. Very, very, very respectable player. Fantastic. Really nice to play against as well. I'm sure Emma will echo it. As soon as you see Reckoning as the strat, I think as the Neverborn player, your eyes kind of light up a little bit and think, right, this is something I can get going. But actually it was a really interesting game that it didn't really go that way. So I was against a Parker Barrows crew that was, again, quite bespoke. It was Doc Mitchell, a Prospector, a Scavenger, Mad Dog with the Dark Powers upgrade, and Hans and the Emissary. So there was a lot of healing and a lot of bubbles within this kind of very shooty, nasty crew. And I kind of went into it thinking that I needed to go with easily scoreable options. So again, I went with the Claim Jump on Teddy because it worked in the last round. So why wouldn't it work in this one? He thought foolishly. And I went with the Search the Ruins because, again, I think that's the ubiquitous one you can go with. And there was a very, very interesting interaction early on. I got into the habit as a new player of kind of repeating things at the start of battles, and I need to get out of the habit. And the thing that I often repeat at the start is Baby Cade will go forward, he'll lure Pandora, he'll cry for Teddy, and you get this nice little cluster that's 5 inches further up the field. Not so good when Mad Dog has a shotgun that can blast. So Radek ran down, and by this point the Poltergeist had walked up as well. So I had 4 models huddled behind a building. And the Mad Dog walked forward, and it was the strength of the cards in my hand saved me. I had the Red Joker and 2 13s. So as he was shooting at me, I was able to kind of get away with it. But
that could have gone the other way.
He lamented afterwards that his cards weren't particularly great. And I think we can both admit that if it had been the other way around, that would have been half my crew on half their health. However, that swayed things a little bit. Pandora then walked up to Mad Dog and had him shoot himself essentially a couple of times, which he didn't appreciate. And Hinamatsu subbed in again for me instead of Carver, and Hinamatsu got very quickly into Hans's face to kind of shut down that shooting. I'd encountered Hans once before in a Levy list and did not appreciate the shooting either. But it was really, really interesting. Actually, I was going in thinking I was going to be scoring Reckoning. I only scored 1 Reckoning point, and that was on the last turn.
Wow.
Because of the Emissary and because of the Doctor. And the nature of who I was fighting, I had a lot of his models getting chipped down, but it wasn't ticking them down to death. I was trying to put enough threat on Parker that he was needing to spend actions and stones to deal with him. But the ability of having a Prospector at the back to get the Soul Stone every turn is just so valuable. And he was kind of looking towards Search the Ruins as well. And there was that a little bit of toing and froing with him having the Prospector. As the Scavenger, he could mess with my putting down scheme markers. So it was very much a very tight game.
So, Tom, you hinted that things went different with Teddy Claim Jump. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I kind of did like a false charge, essentially. Teddy went down the wing to begin with and was threatening early. And looking at how the points were going and looking what Mad Dog did to me on the first turn, I kind of ran him back towards the center to get the Claim Jump on, I think it was turn 3 by my notes. It's at that point Radek's attention very quickly turned to, I'm going to wipe that bear off the board. And a lot of firepower then went towards Teddy, and there was a lot of focus on killing him. Now, it was an interesting thing because it completely changed the battle in the sense that the focus just became very heavily on Teddy to take him out. And I think, as I mentioned to Emma earlier on, Cade being able to kind of heal Teddy and Candy being able to heal Teddy, it became very much, rather than us playing Reckoning, it was, can Teddy stay alive?
Yeah.
And that's what got me the last point, but it was so foolish of me to maybe declare that early. And rather than just doing that, I could have had Teddy kind of hang out near the middle, as I said. He was threatening enough to look like he might want to charge, declare it far near the end. I think Radek then might have spread his focus on Pandora and the Sorrows, whereas in reality, he was kind of ignoring them, making me drop scheme markers so he could draw cards, getting the stones off the Prospector and just pouring damage into my Teddy. And I think it was Teddy. Teddy ended up, I think, with just about half health, just over half health, thanks to Candy healing him with her goodie basket.
Well, what's crazy about that, though, and it didn't play out this way, but it could have, is let's say that he took Teddy below half, or he was able to take Teddy off the board and deny that second point. What's interesting, and you hinted at it, Tom, is that he had to spend so many resources he poured so much into that it allowed you the ability to score elsewhere. And you have to, you've got to figure that out sometimes. Sometimes you can get so focused on trying to deny or score 1 point that you don't realize that you're giving up or allowing 2 or 3 points somewhere else. So that's fascinating.
I think that's key. And I think if you can do big damage to an opponent's heavy hitter and they have to retreat that heavy hitter, that's a lot of action points wasted. Yep. So Mad Dog spent the rest of the game running to the backfield to get into a new position for shooting that was outside of 10 inches of Pandora and Candy. And I think if you take that away, it was similar in the Valedictorian in the previous game, then suddenly that's AP not going into reducing your health pools, which in a Reckoning game is obviously going to be an attractive option.
Yep. So what was the final score?
It was 4-3 in the end.
Wow.
We got to the fifth turn starting, and I just turned to him and I went, I'm just going to shake your hand now, because whichever way this goes, it's going to be bad on one of us and great on the other. And like I said, it was the last reckoning point. I think I was able to kill, it might have even been Mad Dog. And essentially that got me the reckoning point I needed to tick over. It was one of those ones that I think, as Emma hinted at, I was focusing more on the schemes, and then the strat came in to kind of win the game. So it was very much a showpiece finale, shall we say. And he was a fantastic opponent. He was incredibly forthcoming with information about Parker and what he was aiming to do with him, because, you see the Parker model, it's a guy with a gun, but the dropping of the scheme markers is incredibly thematic and fun to play against, but it's not when you're trying to score Search of the Ruins. Right. It's really obnoxious when you go for that. Yeah. I would say that the thing that really interested me was the Emissary. The Emissary is a fascinating model in Outcasts, with the sheer utility of what he can bring to the crew. And he had a very, very versatile crew. The Scavenger is fantastic with that as well. Whereas I was very much one-track mind of, right, I'm going to try and put as much damage on the leader as I can to then open up avenues for other attacks.
Yeah, Outcasts are good, man, in this edition. I think they struggled a little bit in 2E, but they've got a lot of strength. And I've played against a good Parker player more than once, and Parker can be just brutal.
I think they just have a decent answer to a lot of questions. Emma was saying about Dreamer, and within the Neverborn, I think I'd be terrified if Tara came out against Dreamer with her ability to kind of, attack buried models. And I think, Levy is a powerhouse as well. They're a really attractive faction. I think if I was I am a new player, but if I was a brand new player, I think you could do worse than starting with the Outcasts, because I think you've got such a variety of specialists, but their versatile models allow to make up, good ground.
I completely agree. So, James, you played David Cameron. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, certainly. So David was in Neverborn and was in Bayou. I don't know where I got that from. And was playing Zoraida. So David, again, I think is a relatively new player in from Guild Ball. So again, a bit of a theme running through the day. It was. Yeah, she'd chosen to take Zoraida into Reckoning, which initially kind of threw me. Now I've been playing kind of against a Bay and against Zoraida since first edition, so I'm kind of used to how you would play around a Bay. So I think his thinking was it was a fairly mobile list and it was a fairly scheme-heavy pool. So I think his thinking was, I'll obey my opponent's heavy hitters to hit each other while my Silurids run around and score schemes. Now, this objective set screams Keris, and I wasn't so on play new stuff as a plan that I wasn't going to take this sort of gift toss, especially on table 3 in the final round. So I've chosen to take Keris, which was a pretty good matchup for me. Keris can hunt Silurids down. The crew in general is very mobile, and you've got 4 models native that can delete scheme markers at range. And it turns out catfish do not enjoy being on fire. Who knew? So it was. I was able to get ahead fairly handily. And before the end, I was able to educate David in the hazardous terrain rules as he encountered many a pyre. But it was a good game, and David played fairly solidly. I just think he had the wrong crew on the table for the objective set, and that is not a pool I'd want to fight Keris in. There's a lot of that's pretty much optimum conditions for Keris, that pool. So it's easy to get up fairly handily on that one.
What was the final score?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I didn't have that to hand, which is unprofessional of me. I got up 6-3.
Okay, good. So, Emma, you had quite the matchup. You're going up against somebody you're familiar with and played a few games against. So, it was you and Alex at top table. What did Alex bring?
Alex took McCabe.
Oh, nice.
And he took 3 Jorogumo against me because they're willpower 7. And I was just like, these giant, so he normally runs them with Asami, but they're these giant spiders. Well, you know what Jorogumo are, sorry. Yeah. But they're just having these 3 massive spiders on the board. And in complete contrast to Tom, whenever I see Reckoning, I shit myself. I'm terrible at Reckoning. Because despite sort of I'm not really that much of an aggressive player. So having to go and kill stuff, to score points I find it quite difficult, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's not your play style.
No, it's not. And that's why I was saying earlier, I struggle with Nekima because it just doesn't match my play style at all. But I was quite fortunate in this one. Teddy was just incredible. So in turn 1, Alex sort of took a bit of a gamble and extended a Jorogumo to come up my Teddy. But he'd already given him an upgrade with McCabe, so he was fast. And the Jorogumo have the ability to gain a flicker to get positives to the attack and damage. Yep. So there was a fast Jorogumo who had effectively 2 focused attacks on me and then another attack. He did 0 damage to Teddy. Did absolutely nothing. Either missed the attacks or Black Jokered the damage. It was bad for Alex because that meant Teddy then activated and he took that Jorogumo off in 1 round of combat. So in that first turn, might have been in the first couple of activations, he'd lost one of his big beaters and I hadn't. And I think that started to tip the scales towards how much killing power he had later in the game. Because the same thing happened turn 2. Teddy took another Jorogumo off the board.
Wow.
So Alex had sort of 2 halves of a crew. He had a very schemy crew and then these giant Jorogumo who were his killing power. Yep. And 2 of them were gone, very early into turn 2. So at that point I was a bit like, oh, maybe I can do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really sort of cinematic first few turns. It was really good.
Yeah, it's very funny to me because I feel like the conventional wisdom that I keep hearing, and maybe I just haven't been keeping up to date and it's changed, is I hear a lot of people kind of pooing all over Teddy, but it sounds from you and Tom, it sounds like you guys find Teddy to be definitely worth the points.
Oh yeah, I take him in every game without fail. Yeah. He's there every game, and I always run Serena Bowman as well, and she's got a quick action heal and condition removal. So between her and Teddy's own abilities to heal, sometimes I'll run a Sacrificial Daydream or Alp towards Teddy, and he's got a quick action to eat a friendly model to heal their wounds. Right. So if he's really injured, he'll eat something like an Alp, heal 5 wounds, and then Serena can heal him to full. So he can just be on this murderous rampage. And, with Flurry and his 3, 4, 6 damage track, he should kill something every turn. And if he doesn't, I don't think you're playing him right.
I don't think anyone can disparage a min 3/3 attack model.
No, it's just so good, isn't it?
It's reliable, and reliability is what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like Emma said, he might appear fragile at first, but with all of the healing, both in a Pandora crew and in a Dreamer crew, if you are smart about your activation orders, you can keep him up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's Yeah. Yes, that is the answer. If you can get your activations right, Teddy won't die and he can just wreck face.
And that's the key. So a lot of times, people go, well, God, it was so tough because they had all that healing and stuff like that. Timing your heals and knowing in what order to do things is a lot harder than people realize. So I don't want to make it, for those listening, I don't want to make it sound like, it's super easy. You've got all that healing and you can keep Teddy up. It takes some very smart decision making in game in order to time that right. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, and I've done it because I'm not good at this, but where you didn't time things right. You overexposed a big beater, and even though you had the healing didn't come in soon enough, or you didn't time it correctly, or you used it too early, or positioning was wrong. So there's definitely a good amount of skill involved in making Teddy stay up.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I always mess that up with Chompy, because I've got the two big beaters. I can tend to keep one alive and not the other, because I need to be using those activations sort of reliably on one to make sure they stay going. So either Chompy dies because I overextend him, and although he's a henchman, Soulstone Prevention can only do so much. So I can't. So I think you're definitely right. You have to be really sort of choice and precise with where you send your healing and how you sort of do that activation control. Because if you spread it too thin, you end up with two very injured big models, and then they both die.
I'd echo that as well. The Carver for me has been affectionately nicknamed Carvey Dent because he's usually dead while Teddy lives. It's very much that kind of, you have to prioritize what you're healing.
Yeah, absolutely. You can pick one, I think.
And this is a situation where being on offense is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to focus fire something down than it is to defend something that's getting that focus fire.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
all right,
definitely.
guys. Well, congratulations, Emma, and on that win. What was the final score?
It was 8-3.
Wow.
I was so pleased.
Yeah, I bet you were. Was it an uncomfortable drive home?
I didn't find it uncomfortable. I was so happy because, like James said, going into this tournament meant quite a lot to me, because I'd been sitting in top 10 in the rankings for quite a while, and I was like, I'll go to nationals. I just have to do reasonably well. But I think I just got a bit stressed about having to do so well that I tanked massively, because I got in my own head and I was overthinking stuff. So I almost dropped out of qualifying for Masters, sorry. So going into this event, I was like, oh shit, I really need to podium here. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my Masters invite. And then I saw I was playing Alex in the last round, and I was just like, oh, I play him so much, and the amount of times I actually win, reliably and comfortably, is so few and far between that I was just I was a bit disheartened. But then there was a montage moment where I was singing Eye of the Tiger in my head and psyching myself up for it. And apparently that works. So
I suspect Alex was secretly relieved that he gave it his all, and you got out ahead, because I'm not sure I'd have been brave enough to give it my all in that game and risk being on Radek's couch or something for the next 6 months. I think that would have been, I don't think I'd have had the balls to go all out there.
So unfortunately for those of you in the UK, and James, you have been subject to this before, is I usually end up bugging the crap out of somebody on Messenger who's playing, and just to kind of find out what's going on and how things are going. And Alex, unfortunately for him, he was the one I picked to bug, and I can tell you, Emma, he couldn't wait to tell me, was super excited on Messenger to tell me who the top table was. And then I would venture to guess that he was happier that you won than if he won. He was super excited when he messaged me that you had won the matchup and things like that. And I don't know Alex quite well enough to say that that he would have been happier had he won, but I can tell you that as he expressed to me, he was super excited that you had
There's
the
an
win.
alternate timeline where this is a far saltier podcast.
I'm sure. That's funny. But
he was probably happy that I won because it meant he had a lift to the Masters weekend.
That's funny. Yeah, but boy, that's brutal. So he definitely rolled the dice with those Joe Germo, and it just looks like the cards went against him.
Yeah, I think he lost his killing power.
Yeah,
quite early on, and then he had some scheme runners, but hucksters aren't exactly difficult to kill. Mm-hmm. And he took detonate the charges and harness the ley lines, so they were all quite reliably sort of near my models and on the centre. So it's not like they were scheming off on a flank or anything like that. So they were definitely within sort of threat range to kill. So it just sort of ended up as a bit of a downward spiral, I think, for him as he lost sort of hemorrhaged models left, right and centre.
Reckoning's like that. If you go for an aggressive reckoning game, it goes one of two ways pretty quickly. You either wind up compounding your advantage or compounding your disadvantage.
Exactly. You tend to figure it out pretty early which direction that's going to go too.
Absolutely.
So guys, let's take another quick break. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we've got two seasoned Malifaux tournament players and someone who's relatively new. I want to talk and learn from each of them kind of what they do to prepare for an event. And I also want to talk a little bit about some play etiquette during an event. So we're going to take one more break and take advantage of who we have on the show. We'll be right back. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast. Okay, so now that we know obviously how each of those rounds went, I would be interested to know, because I know there's a lot of people out there that get very nervous before an event. We've got a big event coming up. When we're recording this, it's the weekend before the big North Carolina Grand Tournament, which is next weekend. And I can tell you the locals are starting to get nervous. We've got people coming in from all over the country to play in it. James, you've played in a lot of events. Are there certain things that you do to prepare for an event, whether it be something that's ritualistic or something that's truly kind of training? What is the week before, the 2 weeks before an event? What do you do to prepare?
Yeah, I have some stuff that's practical and some stuff that's ritualistic. So I'll probably cover both. Generally, if we know the objectives in advance, I write a few lists, and generally I tend to write a list for probably 2 different masters for each round, and sort of play about with that. Quite often, they'll vary. Depending on which way I want to go, I'll kind of look at the schemes and just go, which ones and what do I want to target? Do I want to almost cross off the sheet before I start? And think about a little bit about what do I want to, what's probably my worst case scenario in that round? What would I absolutely not want to face? And generally I'll try and play my home games, my games at my local store. I will aim to sort of play the more difficult rounds from my perspective for the event in advance where I can. If I don't know the events in advance, I tend to, I've got a random little spreadsheet with a macro in it that will randomize me a set of objectives, an opposing faction, and sort of a concealed opposing master. And I'll kind of go through the hiring process. A couple of times it's a good thing to do, potentially on a lunch break at work, or if I've got 15 minutes in an evening. It's a relatively quick exercise I can go through. So that I tend to do a little bit of that and just kind of know in advance roughly what I'm thinking of taking. And inevitably, that's never the crew I actually take. But having somewhere to start and having thought about some of those pitfalls in advance helps in the stress of a day. And sort of, and that for a big event, I'll tend to go through my case, take out anything I know I'm not going to need, make sure I know that I've got everything there, so I've not got a blind panic on the day. Where's my blank card? Make sure all my cards are in order. Just as much as I can do to kind of take any stress or mental work out of the day that I can do in advance. I tend to aim to do that. I have some ritualistic stuff as well. So for a major event, I'll tend to get my hair cut before the event.
That's interesting.
I do have some lucky tournament socks, but the less said about those, the better.
No, talk about it. Go into detail now.
I'm not discussing my underwear in detail on the internet. I don't think. I think that's got to be a Patreon exclusive. Oh God! But there is a Third Floor Wars Patreon. I'm sure that's tanked its sub rating right now. But I do have some ritualistic stuff, but broadly, the main thing is any thinking I can do in advance will help me, not have to do the thinking on the day, because there's enough thinking in Malifaux before you start. And probably the only other thing, before I waffle on too much, I tend to try and set sort of measuring expectations early, so I will make a point of really measuring carefully my first few moves, which tends, opponents then tend to cotton on to the fact that I want them to measure effectively, and I tend to try and set the expectation that, we're going to talk positions through, measure effectively, and then if players don't get that hint and sort of we're getting bendy tape measures and stuff, I'll often I'll take a call between either saying something or matching their style, depending on where I think we are in the game, and sort of flex my measuring style to other people. That's a little bit to taste, but it's one of those where sometimes it's easier to match your opponent's measuring style than explain to them in detail why the way they're measuring isn't accurate. And sometimes in the heat of a game, that's easier to do, albeit it's probably not enforcing the correct behaviors.
Yeah, I do something very similar, James. I try to set the tone and be very specific and precise in my measuring. And I it's funny, I don't even think I realized it, but I'm super verbal about it to set the tone. Now, when I see shenanigans going on the other side, and understand that a lot of times this is not intentional cheating, but because not everybody is as psychotic as I am about measuring, and it just bugs the crap out of me when people are not precise in their measuring. So what I do is I get super passive aggressive at that point, and somebody will do a move, and I know damn well that wasn't a six inches that they moved. So being kind of a jerk, I'll go, well, what's the move on that model again? And the goal is 6 inches. And I said, and was that 6 inches? Sometimes that works. I tend to be precise, but it's funny. I do the same thing, James, where I try to kind of set the tone. Emma, how different is there anything that James does pre-tournament that you share with him, or anything different that you do?
Lucky socks.
Well, you say that. I do always wear dungarees. That's like my wargaming. Because then, I don't know, they're comfortable. I feel good. If I've got dungarees on and I've got a flower crown on or flowers in my hair, generally I do quite well. So I've become a bit superstitious now that I have to sort of, same way James gets his haircut, I do my hair and my makeup and I wear like my wargaming dungarees. And in fact, I didn't wear them at Nationals and I did terribly, and then I did wear them at this tournament and I won the fucking thing. It's definitely dungarees that are for the win. I think I'm normally in denial about events for a good few weeks before they're about to happen, and then suddenly it gets to a week before and I'm like, shit, I probably should prepare for this. So I do look at the lists, the schemes and strats if they're out, and I'll try and do a test game. And because, me and Alex play against each other a lot, there's always somebody I can get a game with, even if it's like the night before, we're like, quick, should we practice this? But especially because I play the same master for quite a good chunk of time, I often have a standard sort of core point that I always start with. So it makes that decision process, like what James was saying, a lot easier when I'm actually at the event, because I'm always going to take these 5 models. So then it's just, do I want a bit more killy? Do I want a bit more schemy? And I've tend to pocketed all my models into little brackets of, if this pool's there, take this. And it just takes that sort of pressure off it, I think. Something I do at events where I maybe don't want or need to do as well is I make like a bad things bingo list. Me and Alex have done this a few nationals. So you make a list of all fun things that you can try and achieve. So if your game is going terribly, you can be like, try and kill someone's master with your totem. Or, you know, you make all these other little mini objectives that you can do that are really fun. So it doesn't matter how the game went, you got lots of mini wins, and then you leave that game feeling really good. And your opponent's like, oh, I won, but that's okay because they had a great time doing whatever their little thing was that they were doing.
That's funny.
It just takes some of the pressure off, I think.
Yeah.
And it's something I've tried to get a lot better at, because I can get a bit salty when I lose. But I'm definitely getting much better at that by coming up with other ways to sort of enjoy the game and not put too much emphasis on having to win everything all the time.
Yeah. It I struggle with it. I struggle with it, and I keeping my emotions in check is something that I still work on, and it doesn't, when I'm playing, it doesn't tend to show itself as me getting salty necessarily, though that has happened. What'll end up happening is I throw good money after bad. So I'll make a mistake or see a mistake made, or something will go not my way with card flips. You know, my Teddy takes out my Jorogrumbo type thing. Yeah. And what that'll end up do is take me off my game. And then I'll just compound that either mistake or that bad flip of the cards and turn it into something terrible. And I think both your and James's advice is good, which is, you know, removing stressors. It can help minimize that, you know, getting good night's sleep, you know, just all of those types of things.
Actually eating sensibly and not just eating like 3 chocolate bars every round and having like 10 cups of coffee. That's not a good idea. You end up like as a gibbering mess by the end of round 1.
Yep. And hydrating too is another big thing, is to make sure I have something to drink. So Tom, the thing I want to talk to you about is kind of, I don't have the right term for it, but kind of table etiquette, or how to be a good opponent. So you had, you know, as we talked through the 3 rounds, you were very complimentary of each person that you played. And, you know, we kind of talked about how welcoming the community is. I would be interested to hear from you, you know, what makes somebody a good opponent? So even if you were to lose the game, you walk away going, I really enjoyed that game. Can you kind of give us an idea of either what you saw, or maybe something that you do even in other games that really can help create that positive experience?
Yeah, it's something I'm quite passionate about from the games that I've played. I think I mentioned earlier on the podcast, I'm quite nervy going to organized play, simply just because I think when you've been a face on the screen for a little bit, you are worried about how you show. And I think I did something similar in terms of preparation, that I drove up with a friend, and on the way up in the car, we just chatted through the schemes and the strats together. I hadn't looked on them at that point, and it was both of us going into our first event new, and that kind of eased things. But I think you tend to think about events in social and mechanical viewpoints. And I think in terms of socially, the first thing that I'll often do when I play someone is offer to buy them a drink. So at the start of the game, at the end of the game, whichever the result is, I'll offer to get them a drink. And that often is the icebreaker of sitting down against someone who maybe you don't know and already developing that rapport. I think a lot of players can also be aware of the difference between freedom of information and helpful information. Obviously, Malifaux is a game where you are free to know all the information that's not being hidden, you know, in terms of like what cards do, what characters do. My opponents weren't just forthcoming in, this ability does this. It's, this ability is good for this. So it didn't give away their strategy, but at least gave me an indication of, I'm going to use this now because my aim is to go in this direction. It's not, I'm telling you what I'm going to achieve. It's, this is useful. I think as a Pandora player, I have to start every game by going, this is what Mood Swings does. This is what Misery does. This is how I'll try and use it, because it's such an obscure mechanic. I had to really look on the forums to wrap my head around it to start with. And I think there's a lot of credit to somebody doing that early on and establishing that conversation, because you're there to play a game with someone. And the quicker you build up that rapport, I think it was interesting, James, saying about measuring. If you go to the more mechanical side, I think I use measuring sticks. I think being from a Guild Ball background, if you use tape measure, you're going to get slapped because it's such a precise game for it. So I've got these measuring sticks and proxy bases, and I just put them in the middle between the two sides. And immediately it's a case of use whatever you want, but if you want to, go for it. And I often find that by second or third activation, we're sharing those quite a lot, because they're more precise, they're nicer, they're more clean to use, and it's just a bit more. They're big, beautiful models, but as we know in Malifaux ones, you want to be careful with them, and these measuring sticks are nice and easy to use. I think you've also touched on maybe saltiness can be a thing. I think I'm in a fortunate position that I've got hammered so many times on camera that I've kind of developed coping mechanisms, which is to quietly cry. But I think the other thing you can do is if you're faced with somebody who is perhaps not having the greatest amount of time and they go into that kind of clipped language, just meeting it with aggressive politeness. It might be the Britishness in me, but it's that kind of, if they're struggling with something, just slowing it down and go, and if they're being quite blunt, just go, oh, that's great. Can you just explain to me what the mechanic is there? Or just asking a question that allows them to show with that off. If they're really struggling, they're not happy. I'm just going to walk up and I'm going to attack and be like, oh, have you got any cool triggers on that? And it just brings them back in. I think you are mutually responsible for each other's enjoyment. And I think a lot of players could stand with hearing that information. I think you are not just there to kind of, and like Malifaux has been fantastic. That everybody who I've played, I've chatted to afterwards. And, I'm looking forward to catching up with them again. Obviously, Emma and James are part of similar chats and that. And I think that mutual attitude is definitely something that will ease your own internal stress, which sounds incredibly Buddhist and Zen, but it is that kind of thing of like, if your opponent's happy, you'll probably be happy.
Yeah, the only thing I do, and it's very similar to what you're talking about, Tom, is I will just shower empathy.
Especially with the flips.
Yep. If I got lucky, I'll go, I really got lucky there. That was really, really brutal. If I see something going against the opponent or they make a mistake, I'll talk about how often I've made mistakes like that. And it takes some of the pressure off. And I agree. And I'll be honest with you, there's times where it hasn't been bad luck, where really I know I outplayed my opponent. But giving them that empathetic out, during the game and after the game and go, that was brutal. That was a tough matchup. Things kind of went my way. I think can help with that. And actually, this is something I want to ask both Emma and James, but I'll start with you, Emma. Going back, because you've played so many different people, so many different games. Have you had a matchup that you can think of in particular? We're not going to name names where you really struggled because of the type of player or type of person they were. I'd be interested to know how you've managed challenging opponents, not challenging in a competitive way, but challenging in being in the same space they're in.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, it is very difficult if you're in a situation with a player or group of players that you do have to challenge for whatever reason. And I think the only way you can do it or try to do it is try and be as polite as you can. Mm-hmm. Like it's about that define between being assertive and being aggressive. It's trying to get your point across and explain the situation and what's happening and how it's making you and other people feel without just outright having a go at somebody.
Yeah.
To challenge them in that way. And I think sometimes, especially in a competitive environment, that can be really quite difficult because, sometimes it can be a competitive game where it's heated and it could be a clash of personalities where you don't get on very well. And you're in a room full of other people who are watching this. And it is difficult. And I think sometimes the best way is to sort of either just take yourself away from that situation if, being polite and trying to talk through it doesn't work, or just taking a step back for 10 minutes and then going back in and trying again. Because sometimes you can't get on with everybody all the time, and that's okay. And that's fine, but it's just not having that situation explode into something incredibly negative when it, as adults playing games, shouldn't happen or shouldn't have to happen.
Yeah, it should. It does. Yeah, it does though. And I think, I think it's a lot of what you're talking about there, Emma, is managing your own expectations, and realizing maybe, it's only going to be 2 hours so I can get through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, James? Situations where, something that either there's a clash of personalities, or even situations where you might like have an ethical issue, maybe somebody who you might suspect of not being on the up and up. How do you manage a difficult opponent?
I think it's about tightening up when you're not and setting an expectation. So if there's someone, I mean, we talked about measuring earlier, if there's someone that I have a concern with there, it tends to be, before we, can we make sure we're measuring effectively? If you're going to make, a move or a move that will then lead to a charge, or a move that's going to lead to another attack, I'd like us to measure the whole thing before we move any part of it. You can set those expectations up. Making sure you're cutting decks. I get a lot of flack for cutting everyone's deck. That is wrong. I'm just going to say that I cut everyone's deck. It is right that everyone's deck gets cut. The resistance to it is essentially based on this idea that we shouldn't not trust each other. I trust my neighbors. I still lock my front door. And I think there's there's sort of some basic stuff to not let things get out of hand. But I think the real thing as well is being honest and vocal, and both with the player and in more general sense, where there is behavior that I observe that is problematic, and it's to be honest, very rare. Not being afraid to speak to the player about it, speak to the TO about it, and making sure it's known. Because where I've seen real issues develop in the community, and frankly, they haven't been for a number of years, which is very good, it's been because things have gone unchallenged. And I, from a professional standpoint, I've done some work challenging, where I've, had to challenge difficult behavior in a professional environment. And generally speaking, nobody goes from, nobody get to the point generally that you're involved in a serious infraction. It's not that they woke up one morning and had a serious infraction that day. There's a pattern of behavior leading up to that.
Right.
And so it's about looking for a pattern of behavior, and where there's something that's problematic, doing your best to nip it in the bud. And I've said things to teammates in the past, as I would to people in other teams. I think it's just important we're vigilant and vocal. But I appreciate, that is not the easiest thing in the world. Unfortunately, it's frankly very rare.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, as James finished, it is really rare. The Malifaux community is one of the best that I've come across for being honest and genuine and nice and approachable. Like, I've played 40k competitively, and that is just, from my experience a few years ago, just wasn't even comparable to how lovely Malifaux is. Like James said, I think it is that open environment where you can sort of just make little comments to people and nip things in the bud, and it's a learning and development thing, and it's something that as a community we are really quite good at, I think. So although we're talking about challenging, difficult situations, it's not something that you're going to have to do every game, every tournament.
Right.
It is a really nice environment to be able to play in.
Well, and we get, and this kind of builds off of what you both said, is we get the community we deserve and that we cultivate, right? And that's, making sure that, I'm probably the best way to verbalize this up. Every once in a while, so we have a local chat here in North Carolina. It's a Facebook Messenger chat, and there's 30 some odd people in it, and there's a couple of us that will kind of moderate it a little bit. So if tonally we see the chat going a certain direction, or we'll jump in and say, we really kind of don't do that here. And it nips it in the bud, and it's respected. And that's exactly, what you guys are talking about, which is, setting the tone and making sure the community is what it is. So Tom, the pressure's on you now. What is the worst community out there? What game has the worst community?
You mentioned a lot of players coming over from Gilball, but no, I can't possibly bash my first love.
I know.
I would say people who write YouTube comments, but in general,
they are terrible.
In general, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad community. I think you hit the nail on the head there, where it comes to moderating the tone, and I think, from a social media perspective, a lot of that is on the responsibility of both the company and their social media representatives, as well as those who produce content. The tonal shift that you might have is, if something feels a little bit unbalanced, the initial cry of "it's broken," which is then met with a very fierce "you're an idiot for saying it's broken," looking at you, Shenlong. that doesn't help anyone because that creates divisions. What I quite liked was at the event, there were about 5-10 Thunders players, I think, guys, and no one played Shen, but it wasn't so much a case of he's broken. It's more of a case of we understand this is a bit of a sensitive thing at the moment. This isn't a nationals event. Right. So let's not put anyone under that pressure. I think a bad community is one that allows itself to become an echo chamber. And I've seen that ebb and flow in a multitude of games. And it'll happen in Malifaux and it'll wane away in Malifaux, and the same with every other one. I think battling against that echo chamber, someone's conventional wisdom might be that I should be taking Iggy every single time with Pandora. Mm-hmm. Can't buy the model, so I don't care. And the conversation is then different, and that's an acceptable attitude to have. And I think, like the things I was saying, when you play against someone on the opposite side of the table, maintaining that is just maintaining that discourse without being patronizing. You're there to play games, and everybody's gone to have fun. Yeah. Toxicity happens when memes and in-jokes and other people's perceptions become the zeitgeist, and it becomes that kind of hive mind in a more negative fashion. And I think we can all fall into that trap.
It's easy to do. And there's kind of two levels here that I want people to think about. One is I'm not going to participate in this, which is kind of that first level, which is you're tempted, your first reaction to get it out there. You read something and what they wrote is stupid. So your first reaction is to, go, you're an idiot, even if they're acting like an idiot. And, kind of that first level is to just say, you know what, I'm not going to participate. And you talk about YouTube comments. I can't tell you how many replies, Tom, I've typed up and was smart enough to delete.
I agree.
Because that's what it is. I'm not going to participate. But there is a second level there, which is that sometimes is not enough. Where you have to step in and go and say it out loud and go, this is not okay.
That's 100% something. I think you can challenge in a way that is effective by simply stating the behavior, your emotive response to it, and possible solutions. And I think this is maybe my secondary school teacher coming out here, but it's essentially like, say James' example of measuring. The measuring at the moment is a little bit vague. I'm feeling a little bit unsure about whether this is accurate, and I think it might lead to some misplays. Is it possible for us to sort this through and review it? And I think keeping that calmness, keeping that tone, and that can be, far bigger for something far bigger in the game. I feel that this strategy or this crew are a little bit doing this. It's making me feel this way. Here are the solutions that we can think about. Yeah. It's wording it in a constructive manner. And I think at the risk of doing a cheeky plug, we're going to start doing Malifaux battle reports, but you'll notice the first thing we say at the start of every video is this is a narrative focused battle report, because we hope to then nip in a bud those YouTube comments that you might get of, you should have done this at this timestamp. And it's like, well, yeah, but I wanted to do the thing that was fun.
Yep. So kind of the last thing is, Tom, I need your phone number, because the next time my 6-year-old misbehaves, I'm just going to call you and have you talk her through and correct her, because I felt very good about how you did that.
I mean, I can't take any credit for it. It's a lot of failed attempts to get to the solid attempts that I can make now.
That's funny. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time. Tom, I know you've got some plugs. We're going to have a link to your YouTube channel. Is there anything else that you want to plug?
I just want to say a massive thank you, not only to James and Emma and their, Malifaux group, which is in the Northwest, but also the Harlequins group that I'm part of. I've never met such a welcoming bunch. And rather than just shouting out names like a poorly addressed rock star, I just want to thank each and every one of them, because I wouldn't have turned up to the event. I wouldn't have been able to have this opportunity without such a supportive, kind, encouraging group. And hopefully you'll see some of them pop up on YouTube soon, because they're a fantastic bunch and they deserve to be recognized.
That's awesome. Awesome. Emma, do you have any plugs?
Not massively. Same sort of thing as Tom. We've got such a good community, and that any events that are happening, especially in the Northwest, Carl runs them, and he's so good, and they're a lot of fun, and everybody is really friendly and welcoming. So definitely come to them. I don't know. I probably should know, but I don't know the dates of the next ones off the top of my head. But also, I want to say thank you for Alex for not being too grumpy that I beat him. He wasn't grumpy at all. In fact, he was really pleased for me and really made up, because he knew how much it meant to me. But I was just thinking back, and I made him out to be a bit grumpy about it, and he wasn't at all. He was probably more excited than me. I was in shock, I think. So, yeah. He's nice.
You'll keep him, which is good.
Yeah,
very kind of you. Oh, good. How about you, James?
Just my usual shout out to my friendly local gaming store where I always get a good game, a Malifaux, every week. So that's Leodis Games in Leeds. And otherwise, yeah, I think that's probably about it. I could have been good and looked up Carl's latest event, but I didn't. So,
well, you know what, James? Just pop it to me in Messenger, and I'll put it into the show notes.
Okay, that sounds like
so that we have it there. Well, guys, thanks again. Emma and James, can't wait to have you back on the show again. And Tom, I hope that you'll come back. What'd you say?
Just like them. I'm not allowed back. Clearly, I've just been relegated.
No. This is a difficult conversation.
Tell me how you're feeling.
You as a guest did not make me feel very welcomed as a host.
I told you I'm retired. I'm peacing out from this now. I'm going out with a winning record.
I'm never going to have you on the goddamn show again.
Love you too, babe.
No, that was fun, Tom. And I really appreciate everybody listening as well. So everybody have a good time. Be sure to check out our shop on thirdfloorwars.com for the latest gaming apparel and gear. While you're there, check out how the USFO Tour is shaping up. How does your conference compare to the others in the United States? Where do you rank nationally? Get those models built, painted, and on the table so we can see you at the US Masters Invitational in October of 2020. Also, rate and write a review on this podcast for us. It really helps us find people almost as cool as you are. Thanks for listening. Howdy friend, Craig here. Is this episode making you realize you need to buy some models? Gadzooks Gaming is my favorite online retailer because of their large selection, killer prices, and great customer service. Don't you hate buying an entire crew box when you only need one model? Gadzooks sells crew box models individually and saves you a ton of money. They even have free shipping to the US and Canada if you spend $100 or more. Swing by gadzooksgaming.com and make sure you tell them Craig from the Third Floor sent you. All the details are in the show notes.
I'm going to ask your permission, Emma. Can I was contemplating making a joke about Alex having to sleep on Radek's sofa if you beat you in the final round, but I wanted to...
Yeah, I totally wanted to ask about this with the whole master situation of like, this needs to come up.
But I don't want to do that out of nowhere. So
no, it's fine. Don't worry. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It's fine. I'm probably going to take the piss out of him anyway.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll bring us back. All right. I've got to figure out where to put that first break. We picked up a new sponsor, so I had to add a break, and I don't like where it is, but I'll get over it.
He started swimming in his bathtub of money.
Yeah. I'm making tens of dollars on this podcast.
Well, I listened to the podcast. Was it you guys who did the podcast with the guy who made it? And was like, he just went, I knocked it together in 3 months. And I was just like, how?
Oh, dude, that's what I do for a living is I manage development teams. And you probably could hear it in the podcast. He blew my mind.
That's real drive to get that done.
Oh, and to not only put it together as fast as he did, but the quality. Yeah. And some of them, nobody will notice. But as somebody who's been involved in this for a long time, I was just like, holy shit, like this guy knows what the hell he's doing.
Yeah, he knows his shit. Yeah.
Yeah, he really does. It's very impressive. And it turns out he's a pretty cool dude too. All right. So I'm going to bring it back and James, we'll start with you. Okay.
Cool. That means I probably should have some idea what I did. Cool.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, shit, I made notes on this and left it downstairs.
It's okay. My notes are, you've missed me pointing out that my notes are in a different town. So,
no.
That's fine.
Just make it up. Just completely make it up.
Yeah, this is it. I'm just going to, I'll dip into some mild slander as well. So we'll test Greg's editing skills.
That's funny. All right. A good segment.
Sorry that I'm rambling so much. I think I'm quite nervous about this, actually. I've not actually had to speak about... I'm really good at doing my games, but if Alex asks me afterwards, how did it go? I'm like, I have no idea what just happened.
She just goes into some weird neverborn mode. She gets possessed.
Exactly. I've played so many games of Malifaux that I'm just like, I don't know, I scored some points. Dreamer probably summoned something. And it just happens now, sort of like passively.
That's funny.
Just make it barely there, right? Dreamer turn 2 just summoned a demon and just make up a creature for it and just
yeah, just sort of I'm sort of exposed to Malifaux. I don't play it. It just sort of happens around me.
Rabbits roll back. She starts flipping cards.
I would advise then, Emma, because I occasionally make the terrible error of listening to these back.
Stuff. Never do that.
Oh, I know. I'm just sort of got sat there going like, what on earth am I gibbering about? Like,
yeah,
I wouldn't recommend that.
I'm so glad there's not a camera because I'm doing so many hand movements while I'm trying to explain what I'm talking about. I've listened to the ones you've done with Alex, and he can chat bollocks for hours, so you've done pretty good with him.
I mean, I only end up putting about a third of what Alex says onto the actual final thing. No, it's not true.
It wouldn't surprise me, though.
But Alex is a good test case, though, because I think Alex had that same kind of nerves initially, too, when he came on the show. And, now he has kind of figured it out.
Yeah, that's true.
So, don't stress. And you can't get worse than Alex, so you're fine. All right.
I'll tell him you said that.
Oh, you can. I would say it to his face. No, Alex knows I'm a big fan. All right, I'll bring us back. I'd like to, kind of learn, what makes you a good opponent. And kind of cover that as well. But
dashing good looks usually helps.
Yeah. That's not James. So
definitely not the dashing good looks.